So, hi guys. So, ang topic natin ngayon ay PS1, Presentation of Financial Statements. So, sa reference book natin, yung kay Valix, Conceptual Framework and Accounting Standards. So, Chapter 8 and Chapter 9 siya. So, yung Chapter 8, Statement of Financial Position, and yung Chapter 9 ay Statement of Comprehensive Income. So, itong topic, itong subject natin ay medyo, diba, sabi ko nga medyo nakakaantok kasi more on theory siya. So, basable. So, panay basa ng basa, and yung ibang terms or karamihan ng terms ay hindi nyo pa na-encounter since ang nakuha pa lang ay basic accounting. So, ito maririnig nyo ulit to kapag dating nyo na dun sa intermediate accounting sa second year, first sem and second sem. So, kaya medyo nakakaano pa pag binasa, di ba? Nakakaantok. Kaya sabi ko, kapag hindi kayo makatulog, kuhanin nyo lang yung CFAS natin na book, ay makakatulog na kayo agad. So, para tong video na to, para sa medyo tinatamad na magbasa. So, kasi ang gagawin ko dito, ay babasahan ko lang din naman kayo kung ano yung nasa book, and plus ano lang, konting discussion or example, para mas madali siyang maintindihan. Okay. So, yung chapter 8 ay nasa page 145. Okay. So, Statement of Financial Position. So, financial statements. So, financial statements are the means by which the information accumulated and processed in financial accounting is periodically communicated to the users. So, financial statements are the end product or main output of the financial accounting process. So, kung nung first year kayo sa basic accounting, nadinig nyo na yung term na yung financial statements. So, end product or main output of the financial accounting process. So, gumawa na kayo ng income statement and balance sheet or financial position, and that's a financial statement. Okay? So, financial statements are structured financial representation of the financial position and financial performance of an entity. So, pag sinabing financial position, yun yung balance sheet. Diba? So, ano ba yung laman ng balance sheet or financial position? Yun yung assets, liabilities, and equity. While financial performance, yun yung income statement. So, ano naman yung laman ng income statement? Income and expenses. So, general purpose of financial statements. So, general purpose financial statements, or simply referred to as financial statements, are those intended to meet the needs of users who are not in position to require an entity to prepare reports tailored to their particular information needs. So, in other words, general purpose financial statements are directed to all common users and not to specific users. So, yung last topic natin sa conceptual framework, na discuss din natin yung mga users of accounting information. So, components of financial statements, ito yung complete set ng financial statements. So, statement of financial position, o yun yung balance sheet, income statement, statement of comprehensive income, statement of changes in equity, statement of cash flows, and notes comprising a summary of significant accounting policies and other explanatory notes. So, dun sa basic accounting ninyo, nakapag-prepare na kayo ng statement of financial position, income statement, and statement of changes in equity. So, madagdagan lang naman ngayon yan, statement of comprehensive income. Statement of cash flows, meron na din siguro kayo nung basic accounting ninyo. So, madagdagan lang ng comprehensive income and notes to financial statements. Although, kaya lang yung basic account, nung sa basic accounting ninyo, nung first year, first sem ninyo ay ang ano lang nun ay service and sole proprietorship. So, dito ang madidiscuss natin ngayon dito sa CFAS ay ano na, corporation. Okay, so ngayon nyo pa lang sana, 'di ba, kinukuha sa partnership and corporation. So, the objective of financial statements is to provide information about the financial position. So, financial positions, balance sheet, financial performance. So, yung income statement and cash flows of an entity that is useful to wide range of users in making economic decisions. So, financial statements also show the results of management stewardship of the resources entrusted to it. So, to meet this objective, financial statements provide information about the following. So, assets, liabilities, equity, income, and expenses, including gains and losses, contributions by and distributions to owners in their capacity as owners, and cash flows. So, yan, alam nyo naman na din yung mga assets and liabilities and equity. So, kaya lang, di ba, sole proprietorship and service yung na-discuss nung sa basic accounting. So, frequency of reporting, si financial statement shall be presented at least annually. So, when an entity's end of reporting period changes and financial statements are presented for a period longer or shorter than 1 year, so an entity shall disclose the period covered by the financial statements, the reason for using a longer or a shorter period, and the fact that amounts presented in the financial statements are not entirely comparable. Okay. So, statement of financial position is a formal statement showing the three elements comprising financial position, namely assets, liabilities, and equity. So, yung financial position na balance sheet, laman niya ay assets, liabilities, and equity. So, investors, creditors, and other statement users analyze the statement of financial position to evaluate such factors as liquidity, solvency, and the need of entity for additional financing. So, definition of asset. So, an asset is an economic resource controlled by entity as a result of past event. So, an economic resource is a right that has the potential to produce economic benefits. So, pag sinabi natin kasing asset, so, di ba, economic resource controlled by an entity. So, kung pag-aari yan ng company, so, ang tawag niya dyan ay asset. So, basta meron siyang, control dun sa asset na yun. Let's say, yung building, binili mo yung building, so, ibig sabihin ikaw yung may-ari, ikaw yung may control, so, ibig sabihin, yung building na yun ay asset mo. Okay. But kung yung building ay nirerentahan mo lang, so, hindi mo naman siya pag-aari, so, ibig sabihin, hindi mo siya asset. Okay. So, there are two classification of assets, current assets and non-current assets. So, when an entity supplies goods or services within a clearly identifiable operating cycle, the separate classification of current and non-current asset is a useful information by distinguishing between net assets that are continuously circulating as working capital from the net assets used in long-term operations. So, pag sinabi nating working capital, yun yung net assets. So, pag sinabi nating net asset, yun yung assets minus liabilities. Okay. So, the operating cycle of an entity is the time between the acquisition of assets for processing and the realization in cash or cash equivalent. So, pag sinabi natin operating cycle, from the time na nag-purchase ka ng asset, then na-convert mo siya or ma-realize siya sa cash. Okay? So, ang tawag doon ay operating cycle. So, when the entity's normal operating cycle is not clearly identifiable, the duration is assumed to be 12 months. So, ang normal operating cycle ay 12 months. So, pag hindi sinabi kung ilang months yung operating cycle, so ang i-assume nyo ay 12 months. Kasi may mga entity na more than 12 months yung operating cycle. For example, yung mga gumagawa ng wine, 'di ba? So, hindi naman siya, 'di ba, matagal ginagawa yung wine. So, ibig sabihin, more than 12 months yung operating cycle niya. So, pwede kasing, let's say, ang operating cycle niya ay 18 months. So dapat alam nyo yung operating cycle kasi dyan nyo din makikita para maklasify nyo siya kung current or non-current. So, depende din dun sa operating cycle. So, pag walang sinabi kung ano yung operating cycle natin, ang i-assume natin, ang operating cycle ay 12 months. Okay? So, yung classification ng assets, meron tayong dalawa. Meron tayong current assets and non-current assets. So, dun muna tayo sa current assets or CA. PS1, paragraph 66 provides that an entity shall classify an asset as current when, una, the asset is cash or cash equivalent, unless the asset is restricted to settle a liability for more than 12 months after the reporting period. So, ibig sabihin, ang classification niya ay current, basta ang cash or cash equivalent ay unrestricted. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, unrestricted in use, pwede natin siyang magamit anytime or pwede natin siyang ipambayad ng liability or payment for current obligations. So, pwede natin siyang ibayad ng walang restriction. Okay? So dapat siya ay unrestricted. Okay? So, ito dapat memorize nyo kasi yung subject natin ay medyo verbatim word for word. So, pangalawa, the entity holds the asset primarily for the purpose of trading. Okay? So, pangatlo, the entity expects to realize the asset within 12 months after the reporting period. So, sabi dyan, the entity expects to realize the asset within 12 months after reporting period. Yung reporting period, klase yun yung balance sheet date natin. So, kunyari, di ba yung reporting period natin is January 1 to December 31, 2020. So, yung end ng reporting period natin ay December 31, 2020. So, dapat ang asset natin marirealize within 12 months after reporting period. So, ibig sabihin, ang titingnan mo reporting period, ang reporting period natin is December 31, 2020. So, after reporting period, after 12 months na yon, kung marirealize yung asset, ang classification niya ay current. Okay, for example, receivable. Meron kang receivable, babayaran tayo ng June 1, 2021. So, ang reporting period natin ay December 31, 2020. So, sabi dyan, para ma-classify siya as current, marirealize yung asset natin within 12 months after reporting period. So, after reporting period is December 31, 2020. So, kailan natin marireceive? June 1, 2021. So, pasok pa sa 12 months after reporting period, diba? So, ibig sabihin, yung receivable na yon recorded siya as current. Okay? So, but kapag more than dun sa 12 months, so, ang classification niya na ay non-current. Okay? So, basta CA, current asset, kapag ang realization ay within 12 months after the reporting period. And yung pang-apat, the entity expects to realize the asset or intends to sell or consume it within the entity's normal operating cycle. So, tingnan ninyo, dapat within the normal operating cycle. So, tingnan ninyo kung kailan yung normal operating cycle ng entity. So, di ba nga, yung iba ay more than 12 months. So, ibig sabihin, doon natin makikita or makaklasify kung siya ay current asset. So, yung normal operating cycle niya, which is 18 months, let's say 18 months. So, para ma-classify natin siya, kung ang realization is within 18 months, so ang classification niya ay current asset. So, kaya receivable natin, marireceive natin siya after 15 months. So, ang normal operating cycle is 18 months. So, pasok pa rin siya sa normal operating cycle. So, ang classification niya ay current asset. Okay? So, but kapag ang normal operating cycle naman niya ay less than 1 year or 12 months, so, ang susundin pa rin natin ay yung 12 months. Okay? So, let's say, ang normal operating cycle niya ay 6 months. So, ang susundin pa rin natin para maklasify siya as current. So, 12 months. Okay? So, whichever is longer. So, yun. So, operating cycle. So, tandaan yung apat. The asset is cash or cash equivalent unless the asset is restricted to settle a liability for more than 12 months after the reporting period. Then, the entity holds the asset primarily for the purpose of trading and expects to realize the asset within 12 months after the reporting period. And the entity expects to realize the asset or intends to sell or consume it within the entity's normal operating cycle. So, presentation of current assets. So, current assets are usually listed in the order of liquidity. Okay? So, pag sinabi natin liquidity, ability of cash in the near future to cover currently maturing obligations. So, pag pinaresent natin sila in order of liquidity, so, ibig sabihin, mas liquid yung pinaka-liquid dyan, most liquid dyan yung cash, then after nun is yung financial asset, then trade and other receivables, inventories, and prepaid expenses. Okay? So, yan yung pagkakasunod-sunod in order of liquidity. So, pag sinabi kasi liquidity, ability to convert into cash. Okay? So, yan, yun nung basic accounting ninyo, ang na-encounter nyo lang ay cash. Okay? So, yung cash equivalents, hindi pa siguro, ala pa kayo na-encounter na problem or transaction na may cash equivalents kasi madidiscuss pa yan sa intermediate accounting ninyo. Financial assets, wala kayong na-encounter na financial assets, but sa receivables, meron na kayo na-encounter dyan. Accounts receivable, notes receivable, interest receivable, inventories, so na-encounter nyo na kung service tayo dyan, yung supplies. Sa merchandising naman, yung merchandise inventory, kung ano yung goods na binibenta natin. Then, prepaid expenses, na-encounter nyo din yung prepaid expenses sa inyong mga advance payment, diba? So, prepaid rent, prepaid insurance, okay? So, kaya nauna si cash, kasi cash na dyan. Sabi nga natin kasi, diba, ipipresent siya in order of liquidity. So, pag sinab liquidity, ability to convert into cash. So, ibig sabihin, si financial asset, mas madali siyang ma-convert sa cash kaysa kay receivable. So, financial asset ito, yung mga short-term investment. Okay? So, si cash equivalent, si financial asset, and si long-term investment, pare-pareho sila, kaya lang, mga investment, kaya lang, pinagkaiba lang nila is yung term. Kasi si cash equivalents, kapag ang investment ay within 3 months or below 3 months, so, classify mo siya as cash equivalents. Kapag more than 3 months but within 1 year, ang classification is financial asset. But pag more than 1 year, ang classification ay long-term investment. So, investment yan, ibig sabihin mag-earn ng interest. Si receivables, let's say, nagbenta ka, hindi ka binayaran. Ang tawag doon, receivables. So, mas madaling may convert si financial asset sa short-term investment kaysa kay receivable. Kunyari, sasabihin ko sa inyo, babayaran kita. May utang ako sa inyo, kunyari na 10,000. Meron ako ditong short-term investment. Ito, mag-earn to ng interest. Hintay mo lang after 1 month, may interest ka na. Or after 2 months, after 6 months, meron ka ng interest. Tapos, ito, meron din ako dito, receivables. Ito, may utang sa akin, hindi pa ako binabayaran. So, ano yung mas kukuhanin ninyo? So, mas i-accept ninyo. 'Di ba, yung financial asset, kasi yung short-term investment, kasi meron pa siyang interest. Okay, 'di ba? So, kaya mas madali siyang i-convert sa cash kaysa kay receivables. Kasi si receivables, yun yung nag-render kang service or nagbenta ka ng goods pero hindi ka pa binayaran. Okay, so, pwede pang hindi mo pa, 'di ba, pwedeng hindi mo pa siya makolekta. Okay, so, kapag sa dalawa naman, receivables or inventories, mas madaling i-convert si receivables kaysa kay inventories. Kasi itong inventories, hindi mo pa siya, goods pa lang siya, hindi mo pa siya naibebenta. Unlike do sa receivables, naibenta mo na yan, naibenta mo na, kaya lang hindi ka lang palang nabayaran. So, mas madaling i-convert si receivable kaysa kay inventories. So, ganun siya. Kaya, in order of liquidity. So, para mas madali niyong matandaan ang current asset, ang lagi kong pinatatandaan sa estudyante ko, ang tanda nyo, CFT. Pag current asset, ano ang laman ng current asset? CFT. Cash and cash equivalents, financial assets. T for trade and other receivables, I for inventories, and P for prepaid expenses. Okay? So, CFT, yun yung sa current asset. Kapag kasi naman non-current asset, okay, so non-current asset, the caption non-current asset is a residual definition. So, actually, madali lang mag-classify ng CA or NCA . So, kung CA siya, kung current asset siya, malamang hindi siya non-current asset. Diba? Ganun lang. So, kung hindi siya CA, hindi siya current asset, malamang siya ay non-current asset. Okay, so, kahit ito lang yung tandaan ninyo, CA lang. Kung CA, basta CFT, cash and cash equivalents, financial assets, trade and other receivables, inventories, and prepaid expenses. Kung wala dyan, so ibig sabihin, ang classification ay classification ay non-current asset. Okay. So, PAS 1, paragraph 66, simply states that entity shall classify all other assets not classified as current as non-current. Diba, gano'n lang naman siya kadaling tandaan. So, kapag naman non-current asset, Ito naman yung tatandaan ninyo. So, plido naman. Plido. Okay, so P-L-I-D-O. So, kapag current asset, CF-TIP. So, pag non-current asset, so plido. Okay, so property, plant, and equipment, long-term investments, intangibles, deferred tax assets, and other non-current assets. So, no basic accounting ninyo, ang na-encounter nyo lang dyan ay property, plant, and equipment. Okay, so kasi itong long-term investment, intangibles, deferred tax assets, and other non-current assets, may didiscuss yan sa intermediate accounting ninyo dun sa pagdating nyo ng second year, first sem and second sem. Okay, so ito ang na-encounter nyo lang dyan ay property, plant, and equipment. So, yung property, plant, and equipment, sabi defines property, plant, and equipment, tangible assets which are held by an entity for use in production or supply of goods and services, for rental to others, or for administrative purposes, and are expected to be used during more than one period. So, dyan, ang tinatandaan nyo lang, diba, kung ano yung mga kasama sa property, plant, and equipment. So, examples, land, building, machinery, equipment, furniture, fixtures, patterns, molds, dies, and tools. So, ang na-encounter nyo sa basic accounting ay land, machinery, equipment, furniture, and fixtures. So, vehicle, diba? So, property, plant, and equipment yan. So, ang property, plant, and equipment subject for depreciation. Except for land. Diba? Nagde-depreciate sila. So, pag sinabi natin nagde-depreciate, yung depreciation, so, ibig sabihin, bumababa yung value. So, ang building, machinery, furniture, and fixture, mga vehicles, so, nagdi-decrease yung value niya, diba? So, bumababa yung value niya. So, but ang land, hindi nagde-decrease yung value. So, hindi siya nagde-depreciate, but nag-a-appreciate siya. Habang tumatagal, tumataas yung value ng land, ng lupa. Okay? So, kaya sabi dyan, most property, plant, and equipment except land are presented at cost, less accumulated depreciation. So, na-discuss nyo din yan sa basic accounting yung depreciation. Okay? So, long-term investment, ayan, wala yan sa basic accounting ninyo. So, pag sinabi nating investment as an asset held by entity for the accretion of wealth through capital distribution, such as interest, royalties, dividends, and rentals for capital appreciation or for other benefits to the investing entities, such as those obtained through trading relationships. So, madidiscuss nyo din yan sa intermediate accounting ninyo. While intangible asset is simply defined as identifiable non-monetary asset without physical substance. So, kung ang property, plant, and equipment ay tangible, nakikita, nahawakan, ng intangible ay hindi nakikita, hindi nahawakan. Kaya sabi niya without physical substance. So, the common examples of identifiable intangible assets include patent, franchise, copyright, lease right, trademark, and computer software. So, meron kasing dalawang klase ng intangible, identifiable tsaka unidentifiable. Okay? So, identifiable and unidentifiable. So, yung unidentifiable, ang example niya ay goodwill. So, madidiscuss nyo din siya pagdating sa intermediate accounting ninyo. While other non-current assets are those assets that do not fit into the definition of the previously mentioned non-current assets. So, examples of other non-current assets. So, tandaan nyo na lang, long-term advances to officers, directors, shareholders, and employees, or abandoned property, and long-term refundable deposit. So, yan yung sa asset natin eh. So, asset, resources owned by the entity, yung pag-aari ng entity. So, pwede natin i-classify sa dalawa, current and non-current assets. Okay? So, pag CA, ang tatandaan ay CFT, cash and cash equivalents, financial assets, trade and other receivables, inventories, and prepaid expenses. While kapag non-current assets, so plido, ito nadagdag yung deferred tax assets. Dati kasi wala, dyan pala, intangible assets lang nakalagay. Ay, intangible sa other non-current assets. Dati ang pinatatanda ko na sa estudyante, plio. But ngayon pala, plido na. Meron ng deferred tax assets. Si deferred tax assets, madidiscuss nyo din yan sa financial accounting ninyo or yung intermediate accounting nyo ngayon, intermediate accounting pagdating ng second year. So, pag non-current asset play, doon naman ang tatandaan. Property, plant and equipment, long-term investment, intangibles, deferred tax assets, and other non-current assets. Okay? So, next is liability. So, a liability is a present obligation of an entity to transfer an economic resource as a result of past event. So, pag sinabi nating liability, yan yung obligation or utang or debt. Diba? D-E-B-T. Okay, debt. So, an obligation is a duty or responsibility that an entity has no practical ability to avoid. So, an obligation can either be legal or constructive. So, sa basic accounting ninyo, na-encounter nyo yung liability, but ano lang, so ito lang yung accounts payable, notes payable, then yung unearned revenue, and accrued expenses, yun lang yung na-encounter nyo doon sa basic accounting. So, pag sinabi nating liability, utang siya. So, obligation siya ng entity. Okay? So, pwede din siyang i-classify tulad ng asset na as current liability and non-current liability. Kaya lang, ang pinag-uusapan natin dito, pag liability is yung settlement. Kasi pag asset, ang tinitingnan natin, di ba, is yung realization ng asset. So, dito, settlement. So, para ma-classify siya as current liability, tulad ng sa current asset, so kapag CL siya, current liability, malamang, hindi siya non-current liability. Yeah. Kung non-current liability siya, so ibig sabihin hindi siya current liability. So pwedeng tingnan mo na lang. So kung CL siya, so ibig sabihin CL, so hindi siya non-current liability. So tandaan nyo na lang yung isa. So current liabilities, PS1 paragraph 69 provides that an entity shall classify a liability as current when the entity expects to settle the liability within the entity's normal operating cycle. So, settlement ne. So, kung mababayaran natin within the normal operating cycle, so tingnan nyo yung operating cycle nila. So, kung walang nakalagay, so ibig sabihin ng operating cycle ay within 12 months or 12 months or 1 year. So, the entity holds the liability primarily for the purpose of trading, and the liability is due to be settled within 12 months after the reporting period. So, ang reporting period, ito yung sabi natin ay balance sheet date. Let's say, ang reporting period natin ay January 1 to December 31, 2020. So, yung end no reporting period natin ay December 30, 2020. So, para maklasify natin siya as current liability, kung babayaran mo siya within 12 months after reporting period. So, from December 30, 2020 hanggang December 31, 2020 hanggang December 31, 2021. So, kapag mababayaran mo siya within doon sa period na yon, so ang classification niya ay current liability. So, huwag kakalimutan ni class after reporting period. So, next is the entity does not have an unconditional right to defer settlement of the liability for at least 12 months after the reporting period. So, the entity does not have an unconditional right to defer settlement of the liability for at least 12 months after the reporting period. So, ibig sabihin, si entity, hindi niya pwedeng i-defer yung pagbabayad, yung settlement ng liability niya for at least 12 months after the reporting period. So, wala siyang right para i-defer. So, kapag ganun yung condition, so, ika-classify niya yon as yung liability niya as current liability. Siyempre, kasi kung meron kang right para ma-defer siya, so, siyempre, ang gagawin mo, i-defer mo, diba? Papatagalin mo. Pwede mong i-extend yung pagbabayad, parang ganun. So, ano lang naman yan diba? Pag sa receivable, kapag ikaw yung merong marireceive, gusto mo, ma-receive mo agad, matanggap mo agad. Pero kapag kasi ikaw yung may utang, diba? Ikaw yung may liability, so hanggat maaari, extend mo siya na hindi mo siya mabayaran agad. So, yun yun. So magiging current siya kung wala kang right para i-defer. So, para pahabain or pa-extend na hindi mo bayaran yung liability mo. Okay, so ano nyo yan na i-note nyo yan mabuti, does not have unconditional right to defer settlement of the liability for at least 12 months after the reporting period. So, yun yung mga current liabilities. So, presentation of current liabilities, PS1, paragraph 54, provides that as a minimum, the face of the statement of financial position shall include the following line items for current liabilities. So, ito yung trade and other payables, current provisions, short-term borrowing, current portion of long-term debt, and current tax liability. So, the term trade and other payables is a line item for accounts payable, notes payable, accrued interest on note payable, dividends payable, and accrued expenses. Okay? So, sa liability class, makikita nyo lahat lahat ng liability merong payable sa account title. So, pag may nakita na kayong payable, so, alam mo na yun ay liability. Except, merong dalawang walang payable sa account title but included as liability. So, yan sa basic accounting nyo, ano yun? Unearned revenues, walang payable, and accrued expenses. Ano yung unearned revenue? Eh, pag sinabi nating unearned revenue, diba yun yung already collected but not yet rendered, diba? Or not yet delivered. So, hindi ka pa, nakakolekta ka na, pero hindi ka pa nakarender ng service. So, ibig sabihin, meron kang liability. Ang tawag doon ay unearned revenue. Yung accrued expenses naman, ano yan, already incurred, but not yet paid. So, yan yung nagamit mo na, pero hindi mo pa siya nababayaran. So, walang payable, pero kasama siya as liability. Nagamit mo na, pero hindi mo pa siya nababayaran. Kaya meron kang liability. Okay? So, no objection can be raised if the trade accounts and notes payable are separately presented. So, pwedeng as one line item na lang siya as trade and other payables. So, yung non-current liabilities naman, so the term non-current liabilities is also a residual definition. So, kung hindi siya current liability, so siya ay non-current liability. So, example, non-current portion of long-term debt, finance lease liability, deferred tax liability, long-term obligations to company officers, and long-term deferred revenue. So, no basic accounting ninyo, hindi to, wala kayo na-encounter na ganito. So, meron pala, siguro na-discuss lang, pero pagdating do sa transaction, so walang ganong example. Let's say, yung mga mortgage payable, bonds payable, so yun yung mga long-term or non-current liabilities. Yung current portion of long-term debt and non-current portion of long-term debt, ito yung class, meron kang liability, tapos let's say installment, every year, babayaran mo siya, let's say, nangutang ka ng 5 million, so, yung 5 million na yung babayaran mo for 5 years, installment ng 1 million, 1 million. So, kapag kinlassify mo yung liability nila, so, titingnan mo kung ang settlement is within 12 months. So, from after reporting period. So, yun yung ika-classify mo as current liability. Okay? So, pag non-current liability naman, yun yung kapag beyond dun sa after beyond 12 months after dun sa reporting period. So, let's say, example niya, kunwari ay ang reporting period natin ay December 31, 2020. So, ang payment ay December 31, 2021, December 31, 2022, December 31, 2023, December 31, 2024, and December 31, 2025. So, yan. Ang reporting period ay December 31, 2020. So, yung first payment natin ay December 31, 2021. Tapos, every year, December 31, 2022, 1 million, 1 million, 1 million. So, kaya 5 million. So, ang tanong dyan, pagdating ng December 31, 2020, so, magkano yung ika-classify natin as current liability and non-current liability. So, sabi, settlement within the normal operating cycle or ang settlement is within 12 months after reporting period. So, pag tinignan nyo dyan, December 31, 2020 yung reporting period, ang unang magbabayad tayo, December 31, 2021. So, from December 31 to 2020 hanggang December 31, 2021, so, pasok pa siya sa 1 year after reporting period. So, ibig sabihin, yung 1 million na yan, ika-classify mo siya as current liability. While yung natitira na 2022, 23, 23, 24, and 25, pag tinignan ninyo, December 31, 2020 to December 31, 2022, so, more than 1 year yan after reporting period, which is yung December 31, 2020. So, ika-classify mo siya as non-current liability. So, yung 2023, 24, and 25, non-current liability. So, kaya pagdating sa December 31, 2020, ang makikita ninyo na amount na liability natin, still 5 million. But, naka-breakdown na 1 million na current liability and yung 4 million as NCL. Okay? So, kasi yung CL na yun yung current portion of long-term debt. Yung 4 million na yun yung non-current portion of long-term debt. So, 5 years mo siya babayaran, long-term siya. So, but may current portion. Okay, so currently maturing long-term debt. Okay, so a liability which is due to be settled within 12 months after the reporting period is classified as current. Okay, even if, tingnan nyo mabuti ha, tandaan nyo mabuti. So, ika-classify pa rin siya as current kahit na yung original term, yung una is the original term was for a period longer than 12 months. Okay, yung parang kanina, di ba? So, ang original term nila ay for 5 years. But after 4 years, nabayaran na yung 4 na taon. So, yung 1 taon na lang. So, yung 1 taon na lang na natitira na hindi mo nababayaran. So, yung 2025. So, ang period natin ay ang reporting period natin ay December 31, 2024. So, since ang settlement ay within 12 months na lang, so, ika-classify mo siya as current. Kahit yung original term niya is for more than 1 year or for more than 12 months. Okay? So, yung letter B, current pa rin siya kapag yung agreement, so, if an agreement to refinance or to reschedule payment on a long-term basis is completed after the reporting period and before the financial statements are authorized for issue. So, yung agreement to refinance, parang ganito. Kunyari, sabi mo, nangutang ka doon sa classmate mo, nangutang ka sa kapatid mo ng 100, sabi mo, sige, babayaran kita ngayong buwan. Let's say, yung ngayong buwan na to, yun yung current natin. But sabi mo, nung malapit na, sabi mo, ay teka, pwede ba yung utang ko, babayaran ko na lang sa susunod pa na buwan. So, ni-extend kumbaga. So, nire-refinance. Or kaya parang ano yan yung, ano ba tawag dito? Magbabayad ka, tapos uutangin mo ulit. Parang ano ba yung rollover? Parang ganun. So, babayaran mo, tapos pero uutangin mo ulit. So, parang ganun. So, an agreement to refinance or reschedule payment on a long-term basis is completed after the reporting period and before the financial statements are authorized for issue. So, let's say, kunyari, 2020, December 31, 2020, so, ang payment natin ay, ang settlement natin nung liability ay December 31, 2021. So, as of December 31, 2020, so yung liability natin na 1 million na yon ay ika-classify natin siya as current. But what if meron kayong agreement na i-refinance siya or i-reschedule yung payment niya on a long-term basis? Let's say, sabi natin, i-reschedule natin yung payment natin for ano pa, 2 taon pa. So, instead na 2021 natin siya babayaran natin siya 2023. Okay? So, sabi dyan, ka-classify pa rin natin siya as current basta ang agreement natin to refinance ay completed after the reporting period and before the financial statement FS are authorized to issue. Okay? So, sabi dyan, completed after the reporting period and before the financial statement are authorized to issue. Okay? Lagyan natin ang date para mas madali siyang maintindihan. Okay, ito yung meron ng date. So, example natin, reporting period natin ay December 31, 2020. Okay, so yun yung balance sheet date natin. Yung date to issue natin, yung financial statement, is March 31, 2021. So, yan yung issue natin, yung financial statements natin dun sa ating mga stockholders. Okay? So, March 31, 2021. So, ang settlement talaga na liability natin ay December 31, 2021. So, kung December 31, 2021 yan, at ang reporting period natin ay December 31, 2020, so, ibig sabihin, 1 year na lang after reporting period, kaya ang classification niya ay current. Okay? So, but what if, sabi natin, yung liability natin na yan, ay ipina-extend natin, nire-reschedule natin yung payment natin, na maging December 31, 2023. So, yun yung 2023. Ito yun. Ito. So, but, yung agreement natin na i-refinance or i-reschedule yung payment, nangyari on February 1, 2021. Okay? So, kung yung February 1, 2021, so yan yung, kailan siya nangyari? After reporting period, which is December 31, 2020, but before dun sa FS are authorized to issue. So, bago ma-issue yung FS natin. So, kapag ang agreement daw para ma-reschedule yung payment natin ng liability ay nangyari after reporting period and before the FS are authorized to issue, so ang classification niya pa rin ay current. Okay? Kasi parang malilito ka dyan, sasabihin mo, ay teka lang, nagkaroon tayo ng agreement na yung 1 million babayaran ko after December 31, 2023 pa. So, nireschedule natin yung payment ng liability ko. So titingnan mo na ay more than 1 year, so ang classification niya ay non-current. But, tingnan nyo dyan kung kailan yung agreement, kung kailan kayo nagkaroon ng agreement to refinance or to reschedule yung payment. So, since, ang sabi niya dyan, after reporting period and before the FS are authorized to issue, ang classification niya pa rin ay current. Okay, so ang tingnan nyo, bakit kaya current? Kasi syempre, yung reporting period natin December 31, 2020. So ibig sabihin yung coverage ng financial position, financial statements natin ay hanggang December 31, 2020. Okay? So, although sa totoong buhay, hindi naman porket December 31, 2020, ibig sabihin lahat lang ng na-record natin ng December 31, 2020, yun lang yung nire-report natin. But hindi, kasi kahit January pa yan, so may mga adjustments, so may mga unrecorded or may mga adjustments ka na ginagawa kaya hindi naman talaga sa totoong buhay natatapos ng December 31, 2020. Diba? So, umabot ng January, February, so, kapag iyon, yung i-authorize to issue, so ibig sabihin, polish na yan, ibig sabihin na i-adjust na yung mga dapat i-adjust. But hindi yan yung audited, Hindi pa yan yung audited. Okay? So, yan yung nagawa natin financial statement. So, kung ang agreement ninyo na i-refinance ay after reporting period, so, ang liability, ika-classify mo pa rin siya as current. Okay? Kasi meron dyan sa ilalim, sabi, however, if the refinancing on a long-term basis is completed on or before the end of the reporting period, the refinancing is an adjusting event and therefore the obligation is classified as non-current. So kapag ito, ang agreement natin to refinance ay February 1, 2021, after reporting period but before ng i-issue natin yung FS, so ang classification niya ay current liability. Okay? So current liability. But what if ang agreement to refinance natin ay hindi February 2021? Let's say gawin natin siya instead na February 2021, nagkaroon kayo ng agreement ay no November 30, 2020. So ito na yung agreement ninyo 2020. So November 30, 2020. So, ano yan nangyari? Pag ganyan ang agreement ninyo, ano siya? Before, 'di ba? Before the reporting period. So, before reporting period, kasi reporting period natin is December 31, 2020. So, kapag ganyan, before the reporting period, ang classification na natin ay non-current liability. So, non-current liability na siya. Okay? So, yun yung titignan ninyo, yung mga dates din. So, kapag before reporting period, on or before. O, tingnan nyo, on or before. Pwede rin kasing December 31, 2020, nagkaroon na agreement. So, on reporting period, diba? December 31. So, ika-classify pa rin siya as non-current liability. Okay? So, ika-classify na siya as non-current liability. Kumbaga, doon sa period na nire-report natin, yung reporting period natin, doon nangyayari yung agreement. So, doon mo siya ika-classify as non-current liability. Pero kung ang agreement ninyo ay after reporting period na, so ang classification niya pa rin ay current liability. Okay? So, yan yung kailangan nyo siyang tandaan. Okay? So, yun. So, yung discretion to refinance naman, so if the entity has the discretion to refinance or roll over an obligation for at least 12 months after the reporting period under an existing loan facility, the obligation is classified as non-current liability, even if it would otherwise be due within a shorter period. So, kung yung entity, meron siyang discretion, siya yung may right para i-refinance yung entity. Tayo, kunyari tayo ng utang, and meron tayong right para i-defer yung payment or pwede nating i-refinance or i-roll over yung obligation. So, kahit na ang due niya ay within 12 months na or less than 12 months, ang classification pa rin ay non-current liability. Okay? Kasi 'di ba kung matandaan ninyo, yung definition natin ng current liability, ang sabi niya magiging current liability siya if the entity does not have unconditional right to defer settlement. Does not have, 'di ba, right to defer. So kung wala kang right para i-defer yung settlement, ang classification niya ay current liability. O dito, sabi niya diyan, if the entity has the discretion to refinance. So, has the discretion to refinance. So, ibig sabihin, meron kang right para i-defer mo yung payment or i-refinance siya. So, ang classification niya ay non-current liability. Bakit? Diba sabi nga natin, habang kapag may liability ka, may utang ka, mas gusto mo, mas mapa-extend or mapatagal yung pagbabayad nung cash. Diba? Pagbabayad ng utang. Okay, so syempre, kung meron kang discretion, meron kang right para i-defer yung payment or refinance siya. So, mas i-grab mo yun na i-defer na siya or i-refinance or i-roll over siya. Kaya ang classification niya ay non-current liability. Okay? So, the reason for this statement is that such obligation is considered to form part of the entity's long-term refinancing because the entity has an unconditional right under the existing loan agreement to defer payment for at least 12 months after the end of the reporting period. Note that the refinancing or rolling over must be at the discretion of the entity. So, may discretion yung entity para maklasify siya as non-current liability. Otherwise, if the refinancing or rolling over is not at the discretion of the entity, then the obligation is classified as current liability. Okay? So, kapag yung entity does not have an unconditional right to defer yung payment, ang classification niya ay current liability. So, if the entity does not have an unconditional right, so ito ay current liability. Okay, does not have an unconditional right to defer or to refinance. So, ang classification niya ay current liability. Okay, so yan yung mga tatandaan niyo pagdating sa liabilities. Okay, next ay covenants. Okay, so covenants are often attached to borrowing agreements which represent undertakings by the borrower. Okay, so ito agreement to. So, covenants are actually restrictions on the borrower as to undertaking further borrowings, paying dividends, maintaining specified level of working capital, and so forth. So, under these covenants, if certain conditions relating to the borrower's financial situation are breached, so hindi nyo siya sinunod, so the liability becomes payable on demand. Okay? So, kunyari meron kayong covenant, meron kayong agreement, tapos hindi niya sinunod, so yung liability magiging payable on demand. So, ibig sabihin, kailangan kung kailan gustuhin pabayad sa iyo nung creditor, so babayaran mo. Okay, parang kunyari sabi mo doon sa kapatid mo, sige, pautangin kita ng 500 pesos, basta sa isang linggo, ikaw yung maghuhugas ng pinggan. Okay, so but dumating yung time na hindi babayaran mo siya, ay ulit. Papautangin tayo ng kapatid mo ng 500 pesos at babayaran mo siya next month. Okay? So, basta tayo yung maghuhugas ng pinggan. Okay? But pag hindi mo hinugasan yung pinggan, hindi natin binugasan yung pinggan, so anytime, kung kailan niya gustuhin na kuhanin, singilin yung 500, so babayaran natin. So, ganun yun. Yun yung covenant. Okay? So, kapag na-breach, hindi natin nasunod yung agreement natin, so magiging payable on demand. So, anytime kung gusto niya kuhanin ngayon or kaya kinabukasan, so kukuhanin niya. So, pag ganun, ang liability natin, ang classification niya ay current liability. Okay? So, effect of breach of covenants. PS 1, paragraph 74, provides that the liability is classified as current even if the lender has agreed after the reporting period. Okay? And before the statements are authorized for issue not to demand payment as a consequence of the breach. Okay? So, yan yung tatandaan sa covenants. Okay? So, if certain conditions are breached, the liability become payable on demand. So, kung payable on demand, magiging ang classification niya ay current liability. Okay? So, but sabi dyan, this liability is classified as current because at reporting date, the borrower does not have an unconditional right to defer payment for at least 12 months after the reporting period. So, ang tatandaan, sabi niya dyan, if the lender has agreed after the reporting period and before the statements are authorized for issue not to demand payment, so ang classification niya ay current liability. So, kunyari, sabi natin, na-breach natin yung covenant natin, yung kasunduan natin. So, sabi nung kapatid natin, sige, hindi na ako magdi-demand ng payment. So, kung yung agreement na yun, kung nag-agree si lender, kung si yung nagpautang sa atin, ay after the reporting period, but before the statements are authorized for issue, ang classification niya pa rin ay current liability. So, parang katulad lang din yan dun sa refinancing and dun sa reschedule ng payment ne. Pareho lang sila. So, basta pag after reporting period and before authorized to issue financial statements, so ang classification niya ay current liability. But if the lender, sabi niyan, but if the lender has agreed on or before the reporting period, ang classification niya ay non-current liability. So, parang katulad talaga doon sa katulad dun sa refinancing or dun sa reschedule ng payment natin. So sabi, however, paragraph 75 provides that the liability is classified as non-current if the lender has agreed on or before the end of reporting period to provide a grace period ending at least 12 months after the end of reporting period. So ang classification niya na ay non-current liability. So, ano ang tatandaan pag refinancing or reschedule ng payment at ang agreement ay yung date niya ay on after reporting period but before issuance ng FS. So, ang classification niya ay current liability. But kapag ang pag-reschedule ng payment or kaya ay refinancing ay on or before the reporting period, so ang classification niya ay non-current liability. So, ganun din sa covenants. Pag merong ang discretion ng rollover or refinancing ay sa entity, so ang classification niya ay non-current liability. Pero kung wala kang right to defer, so ang classification niya ay current liability. Okay. So, yung susunod na ay equity. Kaya lang tong equity kasi na na-discuss sa inyo ng basic accounting, ano lang, 'di ba, pang sole proprietor lang. So, ang laman lang capital, withdrawals, income, and expenses. So, ngayon nasa partnership kayo. So, ganun din yung laman, kaya lang ang nagkaiba lang yung capital and withdrawals since partnership na yan. So, kung dalawa na yung owners, dalawa na yung capital, dalawa na din yung withdrawals. So, ganun din. But since dito ay ano na to, corporation, so ang equity niya na ay ano na, stockholders equity or shareholders equity. So ang form of ownership ay through stocks or shares. Okay? So yun yung pinagkaiba nila ne. So definition, so ipagdating sa stockholders equity, so iba na yung laman ng shareholders equity or stockholders equity. Yun yung meron na share capital, subscribe share capital, preference share, so ordinary share. So yan yung sa corporation. So kung nasa corporation na kayo, mas mainam. So mas ano na kayo. So familiar na kayo dun sa mga terms sa equity. So the term equity is the residual interest in the assets of the entity after deducting all of its liabilities. So residual interest siya ng assets and liabilities. So, assets minus liabilities equals equity. So, simply stated, equity means net assets or total assets minus liabilities. So, the term used in reporting the equity of an entity depending on the form of the business organization. Owner's equity kapag single proprietorship or sole proprietorship, pag partner's equity kapag partnership, and stockholders or shareholders equity sa corporation. However, the term equity may simply be used for all business entities. So, PS1, paragraph 7, the holders of instruments classified as equity are simply known as owners. So, stockholders' equity is the residual interest of owners in the net assets of a corporation measured by the excess of assets over liabilities. So, ito yung mga term. So, sa page 154 ng book natin, capital stock, Philippine term. So, yung IS term, share capital. So, pag may nakita kayo ng capital stock, so, ibig sabihin, medyo, ano pa yan, old term natin, no? Philippine term. So, ba't ang ginagamit na natin ay share capital? Subscribe capital stock. So, ngayon, subscribe share capital. Then, preferred stock, tawag ngayon is preference share capital under IS term. Common stock, ang tawag ngayon, ordinary share capital. Yung additional paid-in capital or APIC, so ang tawag ngayon ay share premium under IS term. Retained earnings deficit, accumulated profits or losses. So appropriation reserve, yung mga retained earnings appropriated. revaluation surplus, ang tawag ngayon ay revaluation reserve. So, yung treasury stock, naging treasury share. Okay, so, yun yung laman ng equity. So, notes to financial statements. So, notes to financial statements provide narrative description or disaggregation of items presented in the financial statements and information about items that do not qualify for recognition. So, notes contain information in addition to that presented in the statement of financial position, income statement, statement of comprehensive income, and statement of changes in equity, and statement of cash flow. So, in other words, notes to financial statements are used to report information that does not fit into the body of the financial statements in order to enhance the understandability of the financial statement. So, pag hindi mo mailagay sa balance sheet or dun sa financial position and sa income statement, so, dito mo ilalagay dun sa notes to financial statements. Dito, nakikita mo yung mga method na ginagamit natin, let's say depreciation, tapos, pwede din yung since one line item na lang yung nilalagay natin, let's say yung property plant equipment. So yung composition ng property plant and equipment, makikita mo kung ano yung laman ng PPE natin dito sa notes to financial statements. So the purpose of the notes to financial statements is to provide the necessary disclosures required by PFRS or Philippine Financial Reporting Standards. So forms of statement of financial position. So, sa form of statement of financial position, in practice, there are two forms in presenting the statement of financial position, namely report form and account form. So, pag report form, this form sets forth the three major sections in a downward sequence of assets, liability, and equity. So, pababa, asset, liability, and equity. So, report form ang tawag dyan. Pag account form naman, as the title suggests, the presentation follows that of an account, meaning the assets are shown on the left side, then the liabilities and equity on the right side of the statement of financial position, o parang account form. Tandaan nyo, pag account form, para siyang nasa T account. 'Di ba? Pag nilagay natin sa T account yung asset, nasa left side, kasi normal balance ng asset ay debit. Pag nilagay natin yung liabilities and equity sa T account, siya ay nasa right side, kasi ang normal balance naman ng liabilities and equity ay credit. So, pag tinandaan nyo, basta account form, para siyang T account. So, asset nasa left side, liabilities and equity nasa right side. While pag report form, diretso lang. Assets, liabilities, and equity. Okay? So, dun sa libro natin, nagbigay siya ng example ng report form and account form na financial position. So, yan yung sa chapter 8. Pati yung line items in the statement of financial position. Okay? So, makitingnan nyo na lang yung nasa libro natin. Okay?